They were considered the antidote or alternative to, well, alternative rock. By the mid-90s, people were growing tired of dark and morose music that had dominated radio and MTV since 1991. All of a sudden, here comes this band, Hootie and the Blowfish, with upbeat music that spoke to middle America. Their debut record would go on to become one of the most successful records of all time, but the band owed a lot of their commercial success to a punk group who had a truly horrific end, and they just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Before Nickelback became the punching bag of the 2000s, there was Hootie and the Blowfish. Today, let's talk about whatever happened to the band. Frontman Darius Rucker would grow up in a poor neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina, to a single mom who was a nurse. He would have 4 other siblings, and being a single parent, she struggled to provide for all her children. Despite this, their family was close, and Rucker's mother was in the church choir, giving the future rock star an early penchant for music. From a young age, Rucker used to use a broomstick and mime playing guitar, and he had a pretty good voice telling his other siblings that he was going to be a big star someday, but of course they laughed him off. Luckily for Rucker, he was driven and he was set on making something of himself, and his mother was quite supportive of his ambitions. It was by the fall of 1984 he was accepted into the University of South Carolina and joined a vocal troupe called the Carolina Alive. It was 1 year later, a freshman and guitar player from Maryland named Mark Bryan heard Rucker singing Billy Joel in one of the dorm room showers one morning and was impressed with his talent. After chatting, they soon realized they knew about 10 of the same songs, and they formed a short-lived duo group called the Wolf Brothers. They would play cover tunes from groups like Simon & Garfunkel and Eagles at college parties and sports bars, one of which was called Pappy's. The band didn't get paid in cash, instead getting free drinks, but since they were college students, that's all they really wanted at the end of the day. It was a few months later the pair decided they wanted to expand to a 4-piece, turning to one of Mark's high school buddies and former bandmate in the group Missing in Action, bassist Dean Felber. Dean was reluctant to join, having grown tired of playing in cover bands, but he agreed to join the group until they found someone else to fill the spot. Funny enough, they would never find someone else. It would be another college student named Brantley Smith who joined the group as their drummer. The band would rename themselves Hootie and the Blowfish, taking inspiration from 2 friends of Rucker, one of which had glasses and whom they called Hootie. The other one had big cheeks and they called him a blowfish. When the pair of friends were together, they called him Hootie and the Blowfish. By the band members' own admission, they weren't big fans of the name, but they really couldn't come up with a better idea. Rucker would have a love-hate relationship with the name throughout the band's career, especially when the group got big, consistently being referred to as Hootie when people greeted him, or being constantly asked who Hootie was. With a new name in tow, they started playing college parties and pubs, doing covers of R.E.M., Squeeze, and The Police. Outside of music, the members were pursuing degrees at college, with Dean studying finance and marketing, while Mark and Darius were both studying broadcast journalism. Dean's finance and marketing background would come in real handy when the band decided to make a career out of music, something we'll talk about in a bit. It was by graduation time in 1989 the band ended up losing their drummer, as Smith wanted to become a Baptist minister, and he was really not a fan of touring and partying. Smith would, however, join the group for some shows later on in their career. He would be replaced by Jim Sony Sonnefeld from a local cover band called Tootie and the Jones. With Sonnefeld in the lineup, the band soon realized that if they wanted to make a career out of music, they needed to write their own songs. Sonnefeld would be a great addition to the band, as he didn't just play drums, but he could play guitar and write songs, and one of the first tunes the band worked on would be his composition called Hold My Hand. He would bring the song to guitarist Mark Bryan. Bryan initially thought the song was cheesy and stood in stark contrast to anything the other 3 members of Hootie had written so far, but they went along with it. The song would be inspired by some of Sonnefeld's friends who were down on their luck and needed something uplifting. But for Darius Rucker, he saw the song as a protest anthem against racism. With their lineup now solidified, the band toured across the Southeast in a gutted Econoline van, playing any clubs and bars that would have them. It was a year later they became pretty well established in Columbia, South Carolina, playing a lot of college parties. And those days on the road really forged the band members' relationships with each other, with their bass player telling VH1's Behind the Music, We had some fights, we had lost some windshields, few mirrors, we definitely had to get over some humps. We were 4 different people from 4 different backgrounds seeing the world 4 different ways. Playing in the deeply conservative South with a black singer saw the band run up against constant reminders of racism and prejudice. It was during their early years the band had to sometimes fight their way out of a racist fraternity party after someone would throw bigoted language at Rucker or the band. The band were also pretty business savvy. Felber would use his finance degree and form a corporation for the band called Fishco that supplied both a salary and health insurance to its members. Fishco operated like a democracy, and the band members decided how they spent their own money. It was in 1992 Rucker suffered heartbreaking news that his mother had suffered a heart attack and died. The traumatic experience would result in him writing the song I'm Going Home, and Rucker's mother would never get to see her son's band play or witness his later success. It was following Rucker's mother's death that the frontman and his bandmates soon doubled down on their dream of hitting it big in music. Mark Bryan would tell VH1's Behind the Music, "It made us all look at each other in the eye and say, we were in this for the long haul." But the odds were stacked against Hootie and the Blowfish. You guys have to remember, it was now 1993 and alternative and grunge bands were really the only types of rock acts that record labels were signing. Tim Somer, who worked for Atlantic Records and ultimately signed Hootie and the Blowfish the same year, would summarize what this time was like writing for The Observer, and I quote, "In 1993 you could have been a craptastic hair metal band called Hellevator, and if you cut your hair, threw on a flannel shirt, and stuck a Tad sticker on your guitar case, you could have gotten a record deal. This is not an exaggeration." Hootie and the Blowfish, for their part, would be turned down by virtually every single record label, with one label telling the band their lyrics were too simplistic. Undeterred by the record labels and the lack of interest, the band borrowed $10,000 and released an EP titled Coochie Pop that featured the songs Hold My Hand and Only Wanna Be With You. They sold the EP at shows and at mom and pop record stores in the Southeast, and through extensive touring they soon developed a big grassroots following. They even got radio play on some local stations. Coochie Pop would sell an astounding 50,000 copies. They soon got on the radars of Atlantic Records. It would be a research assistant named Scott Schiff who worked in a back room at Atlantic Records conducting phone surveys of mom and pop stores in small markets across America. He was 24 at the time, making $22,000 a year. It was one day in August of 1993, he was doing a survey of record stores in South Carolina, that he noticed a spike in sales from an unknown band called Hootie and the Blowfish. One retailer he spoke to told Schiff that Coochie Pop was outselling every other major artist in their store, including acts like Pearl Jam and U2. Schiff would tell the LA Times, "After I hung up the phone with that guy, I called a dozen more record stores from Charleston to Myrtle Beach, and they all said the same thing. Hootie was one of their top 10 bestsellers." Schiff asked one retailer to give him the phone number on the album, which was the number for Hootie and the Blowfish's manager, a guy named Rusty Harmon. Schiff called up Harmon and asked for the EP to be sent to him, but the bigwigs at Atlantic Records weren't enthusiastic about the band, and they simply wrote them off as, and I quote, "a frat band," and had no interest in signing them. But persistence is an important part of life sometimes. Schiff, knowing that he was onto something, called up hundreds of more retailers across the South, and he heard the exact same story again and again. The album was a huge seller in mom and pop record stores, and to his surprise, the band was also getting airplay on about 50 rock stations. On top of that, he also learned the band was moving a ton of merchandise. You're maybe asking, "Sid, why do you have to go through this tedious process of calling record stores to find out what's selling when you had SoundScan back in the day?" Well, according to the LA Times, they couldn't just track with SoundScan because back then independently released records didn't have barcodes. So in order to find the scoop of what's selling, they had to do the tedious process of calling up record stores, and this is how acts like Seven Mary 3 and Collective Soul got discovered as well. Somer soon presented the data to the executives at Atlantic, who suddenly had a change of heart. They would ask Tim Somer, the A&R man, to go check out the band. Somer had famously signed the Seattle band The Gits in 1993, but several days after signing, frontwoman Mia Zapata was found murdered, and the Gits soon disbanded. Somer, who was still pretty new at Atlantic Records, was now looking for a new band to sign, and one thing working to his advantage was that he spent a lot of years in the Southeast, and he had a deep appreciation for college rock, writing for The Observer, and I quote, "I knew from having been close to REM in their earliest days that they played plenty of frats churning out covers. I trusted these audiences on what was sometimes called the SEC or Southeast College Circuit. Often where and how these audiences spent their money was a good indication of what would succeed nationally, he would write. Sophomore would head down to Charleston, South Carolina in August of 1993 to see the band play, and he knew right away he had to sign the group. In a strange twist, Sophomore had played in an artsy band called Hugo Largo, who the members of Hootie and the Blowfish actually saw play in South Carolina back in 1987. Sophomore would end up signing Hootie and the Blowfish to a 2-album deal with a $75,000 advance, which was pretty modest at the time. Back then, bands were getting around $250,000 advances, along with radio and video commitments, but Hootie got none of those. The band members were just excited to have a deal. It was in March of '94 the band flew across the country to Los Angeles to work with veteran producer Don Gaiman, who had previously worked with John Cougar Mellencamp and, of course, R.E.M. Released in the summer of 1994, the group's first record proved to be the antidote or antithesis to grunge. Since the members had been playing the songs that would be on their debut record for close to a decade, the recording was done in just 3 weeks. Once the record was finished, Sophomore took it to a guy named Jason Flom, who was the head of A&R for Atlantic Records in New York City. Upon listening to the record, Flom claimed that the album had no singles and was, and I quote, unreleasable. Flom would tell Sophomore that the album wouldn't be released and it would instead sit on the shelf. Sophomore, however, had an ally at Atlantic and former Nirvana manager Danny Goldberg, who promised he would ensure the album would be put out. But that was it. They would just put it out and there'd be no music videos. Sophomore would write for The Observer that Hootie was such a low priority for Atlantic that a metal band named Surgery got a music video, but Hootie didn't. The group's debut album, Cracked Rear View, would get its name from a lyric from a John Hyatt song, Learning How to Love You. Before the band could actually start selling records, the right plan had to be put in place, and it was a little unorthodox what the label did. Sophomore and Atlantic's product manager, a person named Kim Kamen, devised a plan to market the record almost exclusively to the band's existing fans in the Southeast. They asked record stores in the Southeast to carry Cracked Rear View and display it in their stores as if it was the next Pearl Jam or U2 release. The rest of the markets, including the major ones like LA and New York, they didn't care about for the time being. They thought that if they could land the album on the Billboard Heat Seekers chart, which has 25 spaces and usually showcases emerging artists, it would eventually lead to the band landing on the actual album charts. It would also result in people at the label waking up and paying more attention to the band, and maybe they could sell 50,000 records and Hootie could go back into the studio and make another album. And maybe by their third or fourth record they'd have a good sized fan base. That was the original plan. Sophomore would refer to it as the REM model. Released on July 5th, 1994, Cracked Rear View topped the Heat Seekers charts, and the label soon took notice. According to Sophomor's own admission, up-and-coming artists don't just debut at number 1 on the Heat Seekers charts. The album also debuted on the Billboard 200 charts at number 127, but by August 6th of 1994, the album fell off the Billboard charts and it soon dropped to number 13 on the Heat Seekers chart. All their fans in the Southeast had already bought the album, and the band wasn't getting radio play for their first single, which was Hold My Hand, 4 to 6 weeks after the album's release. And now there were rumblings in Atlantic, which was primarily a radio-driven label, that the band was about to be dropped. Sophomore would end up calling in some favors and started giving out the album for free to business associates and friends, trying to get the album to move. The plan would end up working because a week later, on August 13th, 1994, the album re-entered the Billboard charts at number 161, and radio slowly started to play the single Hold My Hand. It was over the course of the rest of August the album hovered in the upper echelons of the Billboard album charts, but the band ran into another snag. Bob Dylan's publishing company were pissed off that Hootie had used several lines from his song Idiot Wind for the track Only Wanna Be With You. They threatened to sue the label, and in some cases when this happens, the song in question is usually removed from the album. But given how low of a priority Hootie and the Blowfish were for Atlantic, they may have just pulled the record off the store shelves and replaced it with nothing. Before Hootie got signed, they already had Only Wanna Be With You on Coochie Pop, and they had signed some paperwork with Dylan's people back in the day that allowed them to use the lyrics free of charge, but if the song was to be put out on a major label release, according to Sophomore, the band would have to negotiate with Dylan. Apparently the band's manager forgot about this whole arrangement, and Dylan's people, strangely enough, wanted a flat payment, which was rumored to be about $350,000. Had Dylan gotten a share of the publishing, say 50%, he could have made anywhere between $5 to $10 million, according to Sophomore. The band's career was about to change come September of '94. David Letterman's late night show, which was in its second season at CBS, was one of the most coveted spots for any up-and-coming band. It would be one day that David Letterman was driving home from work and heard one of the local New York stations playing Hold My Hand, and he loved what he heard. He would end up calling the show's talent booker and ask for them to book Hootie and the Blowfish. The band appeared on Letterman's show on September 2nd, 1994, and performed the song. The effect was almost immediate. The song would shoot up the singles chart where it peaked at number 7, and the album meanwhile saw its sales double, and it would soon enter the top 100 album charts, and it was soon enough in the top 50. Couple this with their appearance on Jay Leno's Tonight Show by the end of the year, and there was no stopping their debut record. 1995 would be the year of Hootie and the Blowfish. A few months into the year, Cracked Rear View went gold, and by May it sold 1 million copies. It was by the summer of 1995 that they were selling 1 million copies per month. Hootie soon started headlining bigger venues, and the band also had 3 singles on the charts at the time, including Hold My Hand, Let Her Cry, and Only Wanna Be With You. The song Only Wanna Be With You would go on to become one of the band's biggest hits, and the video would feature a who's who of the sports world, both in broadcasting and the athletes themselves. It was actually the brainchild of Tim Somer and Darius Rucker, and Rucker would admit it was his way of meeting his sports idols. Rucker was a huge Miami Dolphins fan and even named his daughter after quarterback Dan Marino. Cracked Rear View would stay on the charts for over 2.5 years. Another thing that's overlooked in the band's success was the impact of VH1. VH1 by the mid-90s was playing more older and established acts, but they really took Hootie and the Blowfish under their wing. VH1 was also instrumental at the time in breaking Sheryl Crow and Counting Crows. While yes, MTV played the group, it was really VH1 who first started playing the band of the two networks. By the end of 1995, Hootie was getting significant airplay on both MTV and VH1 at the same time. The band were so big, they were even referenced in the second season of Friends, the episode where Ross gets Hootie tickets for his birthday, while another NBC show, Saturday Night Live, referred to Rucker as the leader of Frat Nation. The band would end up taking home 2 Grammys in 1996, and Cracked Rear View would be the fastest selling debut record in history at the time. It was once the band got huge, they played a gig in Seattle, and at the request of Somer, they donated all of the money to a charity in the name of Mia Zapata of the Gits. Somer would tell the band that night, "I never want you to forget that you almost certainly wouldn't be here if a brilliant and talented young woman hadn't been murdered. They did as they were told," he would remark. It wasn't just Hootie's ticket sales and albums that were making headlines, as their merchandise was flying off of shelves. In 1995, the Herald Journal from South Carolina claimed that the band made more money from merchandise sales than actual concert ticket sales at a local show. Like I mentioned before, because of their business acumen, the band made so much money by keeping their merchandising in-house rather than going with a big distributor. Just like a lot of bands I've covered on my channel, anytime a band blows up so quickly, it usually results in both critical and a public backlash. Something that's loved by so many people can't be good, critics would usually say, and that was no different for this band. Critics would claim that Hootie's music was bland, boring, and simply not cool. Details magazine would write about the band, and I quote, "In 1995, if rock and roll were on strike, then Hootie would be the replacement players." The band's drummer Sonnenfeld would tell the New York Times, "We didn't wear the right clothes, we didn't have the right look, we didn't portray the right thing, and when you do that, you're just going to get dogged." Even Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails took aim at the band, telling Rolling Stone in the late 90s, "Death to Hootie and the Blowfish." By 1996, things started to fray within the band, and even the band's relationship with the record label also went south. By 1996, it seemed like the band's fame had reached saturation levels. Things got so bad that the band was rumored to have been calling up program directors at radio stations, asking them to hold back playing the band's music so much. The band would even admit themselves in VH1's Behind the Music that by 1996, they were sick of Hootie and the Blowfish as well. Couple this with the fact that these guys were on the road for nearly a decade playing the same songs night after night, something had to give. It was by the summer of 1995 their label Atlantic Records asked them to extend their tour and release 2 more singles from the album, bringing the number of singles from the record to 6, but the band flat out refused. Atlantic was in a weird position, and they rarely had blockbuster albums. While yes, they were a hugely successful label who had huge artists, albums like Cracked Rear View only come once in a lifetime, and they thought the album had enough shelf life to extend well beyond 1996 into 1997, and the band wouldn't have to release a new record until maybe 1998, but that wasn't the case. According to Rucker, who told VH1's Behind the Music, if the band hadn't hit the studio when they did in 1996, they likely would have broken up. The group's follow-up record, Fairweather Johnson, topped the album charts, selling nearly 500,000 copies in its first week, and will go on to become one of the biggest selling records of the year, moving about 3 million units. When their second record came out, Cracked Rear View was still in the top 40 on the album charts and already sold a whopping 13 million copies in just 2 years. While their label and their manager claimed that they would never match the success of their previous record, behind the scenes it was a much different story. There were rumblings that the album was a failure despite having already moved 1.8 million copies within its first few months of release. I also want to point out that one thing that's been overlooked or not really mentioned in a lot of reporting on the band's follow-up record is that it was a year prior to Fairweather Johnson coming out that Hootie contributed a cover of the song I Go Blind for the soundtrack for the TV show Friends. By the time Fairweather Johnson came out, I Go Blind was getting so much radio airplay that it was actually drowning out a couple of the singles from their second record. It was speculated by Billboard magazine that this may have had a negative impact on the band's sales of their second album. The band returned in 1998 with their third record titled Musical Chairs, but things had changed at Atlantic. A lot of the people who were champions of Hootie in the mid-90s had left, and suddenly, given the disappointing performance of their second record, they weren't a top priority. Also adding to the problems was changing musical tastes. The album would debut at number 4 behind Marilyn Manson, Lauryn Hill, and Beastie Boys. The album still went on to sell a respectable 1.5 million copies. While the members were proud of just being able to sell records, Atlantic saw it as a failure, and by December of '99, the band grew jaded with their musical careers, and they soon decided they should go their separate ways. Darius Rucker, in a strange twist, became a country artist having a hugely successful career. The time apart would prove to be just the right thing, as the band regrouped in 2002, releasing a new album in 2003, a self-titled record. It would be by the mid-2000s the band were dropped by their label Atlantic, but they would end up hooking up with new management in Doc McGee, who has worked with Kiss, Bon Jovi, and Mötley Crüe. McGee was instrumental in reviving the band's career, as they were making on average about $600,000 a year, but with his changes and recommendations they were now making $16 million a year. McGee would get the band corporate and private gigs as well as lucrative TV licensing deal. But this period proved to be turbulent in the band members' personal lives, as all the members minus Rucker got divorced and Sonnenfeld struggled with substance abuse until he became sober in 2004 after his daughter found him passed out. In the subsequent years, the band has taken quite a bit of time off as Rucker continued to pursue his country career. Hootie would release another record in 2005 and most recently in 2019 titled Imperfect Circle, and they've also toured since. Apart from their music, the band has also become known for their charity work. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the like button and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll Stories.